My name is Emily Thompson, and at 33, I thought I'd found my forever in James Carter. We were days away from our wedding, a moment I'd dreamed of since we met 6 years ago at a sunlit barbecue in Raleigh, North Carolina. His easy laugh and warm hazel eyes pulled me in, and over time, our late-night talks about dreams and fears felt like home. When he proposed last spring under a blooming dogwood tree, my heart said yes without hesitation. But marrying James meant joining his family, Robert, a towering CEO of Horizon Defense, and Margaret, his sharp-tongued wife, whose smiles never reached their eyes. They wore their wealth like armor, their Carey mansion a showcase of crystal chandeliers and manicured lawns, but their warmth was reserved for those in their circle. I was from a quieter corner of Durham, raised by my dad David, a man whose calloused hands and gentle heart shaped my world. He died 2 years ago, cancer stealing him after a 3-year fight, leaving an ache I carried like a shadow. Dad was my compass, always helping others, neighbors, strangers, even the Carters. He'd loaned Robert money when their startup teetered, paid for their office upgrades, and covered Claire's grad school tuition, never asking for thanks. Yet they spoke of him like a quaint footnote, their entitlement a wall I couldn't breach. As the rehearsal dinner loomed, hosted at their exclusive country club, I sensed a storm brewing. That night, their words would turn my father's memory into a cruel punchline, and James's laughter would break my heart, unraveling everything I thought we'd built. Thank you so much for watching the video. We'd love to know where you're from. Leave a comment below and share your country with us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. I met James Carter 6 years ago at a backyard barbecue in Raleigh, the kind where fireflies dance and the air smells of charcoal and honeysuckle. It was a warm June evening, and our mutual friend Sarah introduced us over a picnic table strewn with paper plates and half-empty beer bottles. James had this effortless charm, a crooked smile that lit up his hazel eyes, and a laugh that felt like it could pull you into his orbit. We talked for hours that night about music, our favorite dive bars, and the dreams we tucked away for someday. He was a junior exec at his father's company, Horizon Defense, and I was a graphic designer building a freelance career in Durham. Our worlds were different, but the way we clicked felt like fate. 5 years later, when he proposed under a dogwood tree in Duke Gardens, the spring breeze carrying petals around us, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I thought I'd found my partner, my home. But marrying James wasn't just about him, it meant stepping into the Carter family, a world I hadn't fully understood until it was too late. James's parents, Robert and Margaret Carter, were larger-than-life figures who thrived on being the center of attention. Robert, a flashy CEO of Horizon Defense, had built a multi-million-dollar empire supplying tech to the Pentagon, his presence as commanding as the sleek Carey mansion they called home. Margaret, always poised in tailored dresses, wielded her opinions like a blade, cutting with a smile. Their sprawling estate, with its marble foyer and curated art, screamed old money and ambition, but it was a cold kind of grandeur. From the start, they made it clear my humble Durham roots, my dad's modest ranch house, my public school upbringing, were beneath their polished world. At our first dinner together, Margaret raised an eyebrow at my thrift store sundress, saying, "How charmingly simple," her tone dripping with condescension. Robert chuckled, adding, "You'll get used to our way of doing things, Emily." I laughed it off, thinking it was just their personality, a quirk I could handle for James's sake. But those little jabs kept coming, each one sharper than the last. First, I told myself it was no big deal. I loved James, and I figured his parents' snobbery was just a hurdle we'd overcome together. He'd squeeze my hand under the table during their backhanded comments, whispering, "They don't mean it," and I believed him. But as our relationship deepened, so did their disdain. When I showed Margaret my portfolio, designs I'd poured my heart into for local nonprofits, she glanced at it and said, "How quaint. I suppose not everyone aims for the corporate world." Robert was worse, once joking at a cocktail party that James was slumming it with me. his booming laugh drawing nods from their country club friends. I stood there, clutching a glass of too expensive wine, my cheeks burning, while James just shrugged and changed the subject. I wanted to call it out, but I swallowed the hurt, telling myself I was being too sensitive, that love meant enduring a little discomfort. The arrogance wasn't just in their words, it was in how they lived. Their Kerry mansion was a stage for their ego, every dinner a performance of their wealth and status. They'd name-drop senators or boast about Horizon's latest Pentagon contract, while I sat quietly, feeling like an extra in their carefully scripted show. James, caught in their glow, seemed blind to how their comments chipped away at me. When I'd vent to him about Margaret's digs, like when she called my dad's old pickup truck rustic, he'd laugh and say, "That's just mom being mom." His dismissal stung more than I admitted, but I kept hoping things would shift once we were married, that they'd see me as family, not an outsider. Looking back, I see how naive that hope was. Their entitlement wasn't a quirk, it was a wall, and I was on the wrong side of it. As the wedding plans ramped up, the cracks in our fairy tale grew harder to ignore, and I began to realize that loving James might mean losing a piece of myself, a piece tied to the father they'd soon turn into a cruel joke. My dad, David Thompson, was the kind of man who could light up a room with a quiet smile, the kind who'd fix a neighbor's fence or drop off groceries for a struggling family without a word. To me, he was a hero, not in a flashy, caped way, but in the steady, unshakable way he lived. 2 years ago, cancer took him from me after a brutal 3-year fight, leaving a hole in my heart that still aches like a bruise. Dad was 58 when he passed, his once strong frame worn thin but his spirit fierce until the end. Growing up in our modest Durham home, a single-story ranch with creaky floors and a backyard full of wildflowers, he taught me resilience, showing me how to keep going when life felt heavy. He'd say, "Em, you don't need to be loud to be strong," and lived it every day. His generosity was his legacy, always helping others without fanfare, never expecting a pat on the back. That's who he was, and it's why the Carters' betrayal cut so deep. Dad's kindness touched everyone, even James's family, the Carters, who'd later mock him without shame. Years back, when their tech startup, a precursor to Robert's Horizon defense, was on the brink of collapse, Dad stepped in. Banks had turned Robert and Margaret away, unwilling to risk a loan on a shaky venture, but Dad saw their desperation. He co-signed a $50,000 loan, putting his own savings on the line, believing in their dream when no one else did. I remember him sitting at our kitchen table, paperwork spread out, saying, "They're good people, Em. They just need a chance." That loan kept their business alive, letting them pivot to defense contracts that would make them millions. But gratitude? That was in short supply. Robert sent a curt thanks in a card, and Margaret never mentioned it, as if Dad's help was just expected. It didn't stop there. When the Carters' office in Cary needed renovations to impress new investors, they were strapped for cash. Dad, hearing about it through James, paid for the upgrades, new flooring, sleek furniture, the works, out of his own pocket. Cost him $12,000, money he'd saved for a new car, but he never hesitated. "Business is tough," he told me. "If I can help, I will." I was in college then, watching him sacrifice for people who barely nodded in return. Margaret once called the renovations a nice touch, like Dad was their interior decorator, not their savior. Robert didn't even bother with a thank you call. I wanted to scream at them, but Dad just shrugged, saying, "It's not about recognition, Em. It's about doing right." Then there was Claire, James's older sister, who'd always been the Carters' pride, sharp, ambitious, destined for greatness. When she hit a wall in her final year of grad school at UNC, unable to cover tuition after a scholarship fell through, Dad stepped up again. He paid the $18,000 balance, ensuring she could finish her MBA without dropping out. I was there when he wrote the check, his handwriting steady as he said, "Education's a gift, Em. No one should lose it over money." Claire graduated with honors, landing a job at a top consulting firm, but her thank you was a brief email, and the Carters acted like it was no big deal. To them, Dad's help was just a convenient fix, not a sacrifice. I'd see them at family dinners, boasting about Claire's success, never mentioning the man who made it possible. What stung most wasn't their silence, it was their smug dismissal of Dad's kindness. Over the years, as James and I grew closer, I'd hear their snide remarks. At a Christmas party, Margaret smirked, calling Dad overzealous for helping a neighbor rebuild after a fire, as if his generosity was a flaw. Robert once laughed at a barbecue, saying Dad had a hero complex, his tone dripping with condescension. I'd glance at James, hoping he'd defend Dad, but he'd just sip his beer, avoiding my eyes. It was like Dad's selflessness was a punchline to them, a quaint quirk of a man from a simpler world. I'd bite my tongue, remembering Dad's calm voice. Let people be, Em. You can't change their hearts. But each jab built a quiet anger in me, a fire I didn't know was smoldering until it erupted. Dad's battle with cancer only deepened my love for him. I'd drive from my Durham apartment to his hospital room, watching him joke with nurses despite the pain, still asking about my day, still caring. He never let the disease dim his spirit, even when chemo left him weak. Toward the end, he'd hold my hand, his grip frail but firm, and say, "Keep being kind, Em, but don't let anyone walk over you." Those words stayed with me, a guidepost I'd need sooner than I knew. When he passed, I was shattered, grieving not just him but the world he made brighter. James was there, or so I thought, holding my hand at the funeral, saying the right things. But looking back, his support was surface level, a checklist of gestures without depth. He'd urge me to move on weeks later, as if grief had an expiration date, and it made me feel small, like my love for Dad was an inconvenience. The Carters' indifference to Dad's memory grew clearer as the wedding approached. When I suggested a small tribute to him, a photo on a memorial table or a mention in the ceremony, Margaret waved it off, saying, "Let's keep things festive, dear." Robert nodded, adding, "No need to dwell on the past." James, instead of backing me, shrugged and said, "They've got a point, Em. Weddings are for joy." I swallowed the hurt, telling myself it was just wedding stress, that they'd come around. But their comments kept piling up, little digs about Dad's do-gooder ways, as if his life was a story they could rewrite. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, wondering why I was fighting so hard to fit into a family that saw my dad as less than. By the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, I was on edge, sensing the Carters' arrogance wasn't just a quirk but a warning. Dad's lessons, resilience, generosity, standing up for what's right were my armor, but I didn't know how soon I'd need them. That night, in a glittering country club filled with their friends and their egos, the Carters would turn Dad's memory into a cruel joke, and James's silence would force me to face a truth I'd been avoiding. Love shouldn't mean losing who you are. As the wedding loomed closer, the cracks in my fairy tale with James Carter grew impossible to ignore. I'd spent months planning our day, envisioning a celebration of love and family, but every step felt like a battle against the Carters' suffocating control. My heart was set on honoring my dad, David, in our vows, a quiet nod to the man who'd shaped me, maybe a line about his kindness or a moment to light a candle in his memory. When I shared the idea with James one evening in my Durham apartment, the glow of fairy lights softening the room, he frowned, leaning back on my thrift store couch. That's sweet, but it'd bring down the mood," he said, his tone casual, like he was vetoing a song choice. "Weddings are supposed to be upbeat, you know?" His words landed like a slap, dismissing Dad's memory as a buzzkill. I stared at him, my throat tight, waiting for him to soften, to see how much it meant to me. But he just scrolled through his phone, oblivious, and I let it go, convincing myself it wasn't worth a fight. Looking back, I wish I'd pushed harder, but love makes you bend in ways you don't expect. Robert and Margaret Carter, James's parents, didn't help. Their Cary mansion became wedding planning headquarters, every meeting a showcase of their wealth and superiority. Over catered lunches of seared scallops and Pinot Grigio, they'd drop barbed comments about my small-town upbringing, as if Durham was some backwater hamlet instead of a vibrant city 30 minutes away. At one planning session, Margaret flipped through my Pinterest board of rustic centerpieces, wildflowers in mason jars inspired by Dad's backyard garden, and sighed, "How quaint! I suppose it suits your roots." Robert chuckled, adding, "James is broadening his horizons, marrying into simplicity." Their words implied I was a step down, a charity case James was lifting out of obscurity. I'd force a smile, my nails digging into my palms while James stayed silent, sipping his wine. Their disdain wasn't new, but it stung more as the wedding neared, each jab a reminder I'd never be one of them. The guest list became another battleground. I wanted a balanced mix, my mom, brother, and a handful of Durham friends alongside the Carters crowd. But Margaret took charge, insisting their country club connections deserved priority. "We can't have empty seats, Emily," she said, waving off my suggestions like they were childish. When I pushed for my high school art teacher, who'd been like a second mom, Robert scoffed. "We're not inviting every local character, dear." James, as usual, sided with them, saying, "Let's keep it manageable, Em." Manageable meant their world swallowing mine, and I felt my voice shrinking, drowned out by their polished arrogance. By the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, I was a bundle of nerves, clinging to the hope that one night could smooth over months of tension. Carters had insisted on hosting at their exclusive country club in Cary, a sprawling estate with manicured fairways and a ballroom that screamed old money. They framed it as a grand gesture, but it felt like a power play. Margaret bragged about securing the venue, saying, "It's the least we could do for such a special occasion," her smile tight as she glanced at my simple navy dress. Robert clapped me on the shoulder, joking, "Hope you're ready for the big leagues, Emily." I forced a laugh, but my stomach churned, sensing the evening was theirs to control. The dinner was a spectacle, white-gloved servers, crystal chandeliers, and a guest list skewed heavily toward the Carters circle. Of the 70 people there, maybe 10 were mine, my mom, brother, 2 cousins, and a few friends who'd driven from Durham. The rest were Robert's business associates, Margaret's society friends, and distant Carter relatives I'd never met. Felt less like a celebration of James and me and more like a networking gala for Horizon Defense. I pulled James aside in the foyer, my voice low. "Where's my family? My friends?" He sighed, loosening his tie. Your side's small. Mom and Dad had to fill the room. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." That was his answer for everything, and it lit a spark of anger I couldn't douse. The speeches were where it all unraveled. After a lavish meal of filet mignon and truffle risotto, Robert took the mic, his voice booming like he was addressing a boardroom. "We're here to celebrate James and Emily," he began, his eyes skimming past me. He praised James's ambition, his rise at Horizon, then turned to me with a smirk. "And Emily, well, she's grounded. The real small-town gem." A few chuckles rippled through the room and my cheeks burned. Then he pivoted to Dad. "Her father, David, was a character, always had to play hero, didn't he? Meddling in everyone's business." The laughter grew louder and I felt my breath catch. He went on, "I mean, the man couldn't resist throwing money at a problem, even when we didn't ask for it." Margaret joined him, her pearl earrings glinting as she grabbed the mic. "Oh, David's generosity was, let's say, enthusiastic," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Always insisting on helping like we needed his charity." The room erupted, their friends nodding as if Dad's kindness was a quaint flaw. I stared at my plate, my fork trembling in my hand, waiting for James to intervene. But he didn't. He leaned back in his chair, grinning like it was all harmless fun, his eyes crinkling with amusement. My heart burned, a molten mix of grief and rage. Dad deserved better. His loan had saved their company. His money had rebuilt their office. His sacrifice had put Claire through school. And they reduced him to a punchline. I glanced at my mom across the table, her face tight with anger, her knuckles white around her glass. My brother, Nate, glared at Robert, his jaw clenched. The room's laughter felt like 1,000 needles, each one piercing the memory of Dad's quiet strength. I thought of his hospital room, his frail hands squeezing mine, his voice urging me to stand tall. This wasn't just about me, it was about the man who'd given everything, whose love still guided me. James's grin, Robert's smug chuckle, Margaret's coy jab, they weren't just mocking Dad. They were mocking everything I valued, everything I was. In that glittering ballroom, surrounded by strangers laughing at my father's legacy, I knew I couldn't stay silent. The spark in me flared into a flame, and I realized the wedding, the life I'd been chasing might cost me more than I could bear. The laughter in the Cary Country Club's ballroom still echoed in my ears, a cruel chorus mocking my dad's memory. Robert's smug smirk, Margaret's coy jab, and James's grin, they turned my father, David, into a punchline, dismissing the man who'd saved their business and lifted their daughter's dreams. My heart pounded, a fire raging inside me, fueled by every slight I'd swallowed for months. I couldn't sit there, shrinking under their arrogance, betraying the lessons Dad had etched into me: resilience, kindness, but never at the cost of your dignity. Furious, I pushed back my chair, the scrape against the polished floor slicing through the chatter. The room fell silent, 70 pairs of eyes locking onto me, James's wide with confusion, Robert's narrowing, Margaret's glinting with surprise. My voice trembled at first, but it grew steady, each word a reclaiming of my worth. "How dare you?" I said, staring down Robert. "You stand there mocking my dad, a man who bailed out your failing company, paid for your office, funded Claire's degree. He gave without asking for thanks, and you have the nerve to call him meddling?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, but I didn't stop. I turned to Margaret. "And you, laughing at his generosity like it's a flaw? You wouldn't be here without him." My gaze landed on James, his grin gone, his face pale. "And you, James, you sat there, laughing with them. You let them trash my dad's memory. That's not love." The silence was suffocating, broken only by the clink of a glass somewhere. Robert opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "This wedding is off." The words landed like a thunderclap, the room erupting in murmurs and shocked whispers. James lurched to his feet. "Emily, wait, let's talk," but I held up a hand, my voice steel. "There's nothing to talk about. I won't marry into a family that disrespects my dad or me. I deserve better." I turned, my navy dress swishing, and walked toward the exit, my mom and brother Nate falling in step behind me. My mom's hand brushed my shoulder, her eyes fierce with pride. Nate muttered, "Damn right, Em." James called after me, his voice desperate, but I didn't look back. Cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, the weight of the ballroom's judgment lifting with each step. My heart ached, 6 years with James, a future I'd built in my mind, but the pain was laced with relief. I'd chosen Dad's memory, my values, myself. Days later, the betrayal deepened. Cleaning my Durham apartment, I opened the wooden box where I kept Dad's keepsakes. His favorite tie clip, a faded photo of us fishing, and his pocket watch, a silver heirloom passed down from his grandfather. It was gone. My stomach dropped, panic rising as I tore through drawers and shelves. Only one person had been in my apartment recently, James, dropping off my returned engagement ring a week after the dinner. He'd lingered, asking to use the bathroom, and I'd thought nothing of it. Now it clicked. I texted him, my fingers shaking. "Did you take my dad's pocket watch?" His reply came fast, too fast. "What? No. I didn't buy it. You're the only one who's been here. It's gone. Did you take it?" Silence then. "I borrowed it, I wanted something of your dad's to feel closer to you. It's at my parents' place." Borrowed? The audacity lit a fresh fire in me. That watch wasn't his to take, it was Dad's, a piece of my heart. Called him, my voice cold. "You stole it, James. That watch is my family's history, and you thought you could just take it?" He stammered. "It's not a big deal, I was going to give it back." Not a big deal. The same excuse he'd used for everything. "Where is it?" I demanded. "My parents' house," he admitted, his voice small. "I left it there for safekeeping." Safekeeping. The word was a mockery. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and drove to the Carter's Cary mansion, anger pulsing with every mile. Margaret answered the door, her usual polished smile faltering at my expression. "Emily, what's this about?" she asked, her tone wary. "I'm here for my dad's watch," I said, stepping past her. James appeared from the staircase, looking like he hadn't slept, his eyes red. He held out the watch, its silver face catching the foyer's light. "Here," he mumbled. I snatched it, checking for scratches, my heart easing only when I confirmed it was unharmed. "Emily, I didn't mean," he started, but I cut him off. "You stole from me, James." "From my dad. After everything your family did, this is who you are." Margaret gasped. "Stole? That's harsh, dear." I rounded on her. "Harsh? Your family mocked my dad, and now this? You don't get to decide what's harsh." I turned for the door, James's voice trailing after me. "Please, Em, let's fix this," but I slammed it shut, the sound final. Driving back to Durham, the watch safe in my pocket, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Walking away from James, from the Carters, was painful, like ripping out a piece of my heart, but it was freeing. I'd protected Dad's memory, honored his lessons, and reclaimed my worth. The road ahead was uncertain, no wedding, no James, but for the first time I felt steady, anchored by the strength Dad had instilled in me. I was Emily Thompson, not the Carters' punching bag, and I'd chosen myself. This journey taught me lessons I want to share with anyone listening. First, your worth isn't tied to others' approval, family, partners, or society. I spent years seeking the Carters' acceptance, but true value comes from within. Second, boundaries are non-negotiable. Letting the Carters' jab slide only emboldened them. Standing firm at the dinner was my reclaiming of power. Third, honor your loved one's legacy, even when it's hard. Defending Dad's memory meant facing pain, but it kept his light alive. Fourth, trust your instincts. Every red flag, James's dismissals, the Carters' arrogance, was a warning I should have heeded sooner. Fifth, choosing yourself is never selfish. Walking away cost me a wedding, but it gave me freedom, peace, and a life true to my values. If this story resonates, I invite you to join our community. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to dive into more stories of courage, heartbreak, and triumph. Share your own journey in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for someone you love or walk away from a toxic situation? Your voice matters, and together we can inspire each other to live authentically. Subscribe now, and let's keep this conversation going, lifting each other up one truth at a time.